Hello there, and welcome to my guide on how to complete Vorkath and Galvek for Dragon Slayer 2 at a low combat level. Specifically, I am just under 90 combat, but I think this is very much doable at the minimum required 85 combat for the quest. Looking at stats here, obviously range level is going to be the most important. I've got 80 here, but I think you can do it with a minimum of 70. In addition to that, defense will be extremely beneficial. I think 70 is going to be very important, and also not that hard to get with the minimum required 85 combat anyway. But if you really wanted to, this is very much doable with a minimum of about 45. Anything less than that, I think you're going to have a hard time because of gear restrictions. The other thing to note is you will need 39 magic for Crumble Undead, as well as ideally 44 prayer for Eagle Eye. Though again, those are really easy requirements that I bet everyone has by 85 combat, unless you're using some type of restricted build. So first we're going to be covering Vorkath, and let's have a look at the gear for this. Now I went with Void because I think it's really handy because it's basically just costs time to get. Now I went with Void because I think it's really useful and it's basically free. It just costs time to get, but you could do this pretty easily with Carol's or Blessed Dragonhide or even Black Dragonhide if you can't afford those. Other than that, I basically went with some of the cheapest gear option that you could go with. So consider upgrading some of these slots if you can afford it. The most notable item is the Salve Amulet Enchanted Imbued, which I highly recommend for this fight. This is an item that you get from the Haunted Mine quest. You enchant it by completing the Lair of Tarnra's lore, and then you can imbue it at Nightmare Zone using Nightmare Zone points. It will take a little while to get, but it gives you a massive damage and accuracy buff against undead creatures with ranged, and it's absolutely huge for this fight. Without this item, this fight gets a lot harder, so definitely take the time to grab it. It is basically free, it just takes time. Now, next most important item is going to be the Ruby Bolt's E, because they have a special effect that, when triggered randomly, hit the boss for a percentage of their maximum remaining health. Now this is capped at 100 damage. Now that's obviously huge because that exceeds any damage that you could do naturally. So this is going to be a huge damage buff in the early stages of the fight. Later on in the fight, we'll swap to the Diamond Bolt's E because they'll begin to exceed the Ruby Bolt's E in DPS due to the fact that they have a defense piercing effect. For weapon, I'm going with the Rune Crossbow, which is a tried and true, cheap, perfect weapon. But obviously, if you have better, use it. The Dragon Crossbow comes to mind here. If you have the Dragon Crossbow, you can also use Dragon Crossbow Bolts, which will increase your DPS by a lot, so I highly recommend it if you can afford it for the quest. Other than that, definitely go ahead and upgrade the Snakeskin Boots to something like God Boots if you can afford them. You could also consider bringing an Archer's Ring if you can afford it, imbue it if you can as well, or you could use something like a Ring of Recoil, but I don't think it's a huge deal as it's just a little bit of extra damage. Oh, and of course, if you can afford a DFS or a Dragonfire Ward, definitely consider bringing that instead, as that'll obviously help you a lot over the flimsy anti-dragon shield. I've got an extended anti-fire potion, but definitely consider bringing a super anti-fire potion as it'll decrease the Dragonfire damage by a bit. Otherwise, with a regular anti-fire potion and the anti-dragon shield, the max hit of Vorkath's Dragonfire is only 10, so it's not a huge deal. I've also got, of course, a ranging potion and a super defense. You could bring a Bastion potion you could also bring a Bastion potion if you have the Herblore level to make it as an Iron Man, or otherwise can bring it on a main. I've got 2 prayer potions, and then finally an anti-venom potion. The anti-venom potion is also not strictly necessary. You could bring 2 anti-poisons just to help deal with the venom damage, but I'm bringing an anti-venom since I'm a main. Of course, I also have runes for Crumble Undead. You'll need that to attack the undead spawns that spawn from Vorkath. And finally, I've got a Slayer Staff, and the reason I've got a Slayer Staff is because when I equip it, it automatically auto-casts Crumble Undead. So rather than fumbling around with the magic interface, I can just equip the Slayer Staff and click on the undead spawn. So for this guide, I will be fighting the post-quest version of Vorkath, which is a little bit stronger than the one in the quest, but the mechanics are identical. So all that said, let's go ahead and jump on in. So the actual Vorkath fight is not that mechanically complex. It's actually one of the simplest boss fights in the game once you learn the very few mechanics it does have. So going into the fight, assuming you're using a setup similar to mine, you're going to want to pray ranged as your magic defense is a little bit higher and the protect from magic doesn't provide any extra Dragonfire damage protection. I didn't mention this in the opening, but make sure that you set up your quick prayers, as one of Vorkath's basic attacks turns off your prayers, so it makes it really easy to turn back on if you got your quick prayers set up. Vorkath's other basic attacks are a basic Dragonfire attack, a basic ranged attack, and a basic magic attack, all of which are unavoidable and are just damage you have to take. The last regular attack is actually a Dragonfire Bomb. For this, you're going to need to move 2 tiles away, and for this fight, I actually prefer to have run off because it makes one of the special attacks easier, but the trade-off there is you're going to have to be a little bit more alert and diligent about clicking faster to get away from the Dragonfire Bomb. That said, you still have quite a window to click away even if walking, and 2 tiles isn't that far to go anyway. Other than that, Vorkath has 2 special attacks that it will alternate, so if it uses one, the next time it'll use the other, and vice versa. The first is Undead Spawn, where you get frozen in place and Vorkath becomes immune. This is a good time to eat 1 food before the Undead Spawn comes out, but when it does, you'll want to make sure you get the Slayer Staff equipped and click on it as fast as possible, as the only way to one-hit it for sure is to use Crumble Undead on it. If it does get to you, it'll hit you for massive damage, so definitely make sure you're accurate with your clicks here. The second special attack is Acid Walk. In this one, Vorkath will spawn a bunch of acid pools all around the arena, and you basically just need to walk to avoid the fire bombs that get fired at you. I wouldn't try to do anything fancy during this phase, as it's possible to actually damage the boss during the phase, but for this kill, I definitely recommend just walking slowly and avoiding the acid pools. You are probably going to take some guaranteed damage from the acid pools because it's hard to predict where they're going to spawn, but don't worry about it too much. Just try to get to an open line that's horizontal and walk back and forth until the actual firebombs stop. The only other thing is make sure that you swap to your Diamond Bolts enchanted when Vorkath is about 1/3 HP, as that's when they begin to exceed the Ruby Bolts in DPS. So the fight was definitely pretty dicey, but we managed to pull it through. No food left and no prayer left, unfortunately, though. So I think the most important thing to remember is the mechanics of Vorkath are not actually that bad, and it's mostly just a DPS check. So if you struggle with the fight, don't be afraid to try to take a break and upgrade some gear, but otherwise keep powering through, and I'm sure you'll get it done. Now for Galvek, the actual items you need for the fight actually decrease in complexity. We're going to be using the same gear, so we're going to be relying on the Ruby Bolt E specials as well as the Diamond Bolt E specials to power us through DPS wise. Hey, it's me from the future. So I realized in post that I totally forgot to swap out the Salve amulet here. It gives you no benefit versus Galvek, so definitely swap it out for a better amulet such as a Glory or a Fury, as it'll give you much better bonuses during the fight. I'm really surprised I didn't notice, and it definitely resulted in me struggling a little bit. Okay, back to the guide. I'm still bringing the extended anti-fire, the ranging potion, and super defense potion, as well as prayer potions. And then just plain old food. One other thing you might consider bringing is if you have it as a stamina potion, as this fight does involve a little bit more running around than the Vorkath fight. Okay, that said, let's go ahead and jump on in. Now the Galvek fight is a little bit more mechanically intense than the Vorkath fight, but it's still not that bad. The basic gist is that there's 4 phases and each phase has a unique theme or mechanic to it, which is pretty easily circumvented. The first phase will put out these fire mines that basically surround the arena. This is very easily circumvented if you stay in the center of the ship and only walk in a perpendicular line to Galvek. So just like Vorkath, Galvek can fire off a firebomb that you need to move 2 tiles away from to avoid damage of. The key part here is going to be to not panic and make sure you just stay in that one vertical line and make sure you move 2 tiles away from the firebomb. The only other thing that Galvek can do during this phase is teleport you within melee distance, so you'll just want to make sure you walk back as fast as possible. Other than that, Galvek has the same basic attacks as Vorkath, a magic attack, a range attack, a prayer disabling attack, and then of course the firebomb. The only exception is during this first phase, Galvek can only use his magic attack, so use Protect from Magic for sure during the first phase of the fight. Once Galvek gets down 300 HP or is at about 900 HP, he'll transition into the second phase. The second phase is probably the easiest phase. Galvek does unlock his ranged attack, so it's best to pray ranged here instead of mage. So if you have the chance, try to swap your quick prayers over to Protect from Range instead of Protect from Mage. Galvek's special attack during this phase is just a stat draining and run draining effect, and this is where that potential stamina potion comes in. If you find yourself getting flustered by the firebombs and can't escape them by walking, you'll want to take a stamina potion here, as your run energy will get drained to 0. Other than that, just make sure you keep an eye on your boosts of range and defense and take a repot if you need it. The actual stat draining effect is very small though, so it takes several hits to get you down to the point where you need to take another dose of potion. Another way to circumvent this is to buy a divine potion if you have access to them. After Galvek's down to 600 HP, he'll move on to the third phase of the fight, which is going to be the wave phase of the fight. Basically, the actual fight looks pretty identical to the second phase, but Galvek, instead of using a stat draining special attack, will gain the ability to send giant tidal waves your way across the ship. The best way to avoid these is to angle your camera so that it's directly facing the wave, and then find the gap in the wave and click on the tile there. I think the best tip here is just to make sure you click the tile once and don't click any other tiles, as it's really easy to accidentally move off of the correct tile and get hit by the wave. There is some complexity here that comes if Galvek issues the tidal wave and then also sends a firebomb your way. You'll need to make sure that you move in a parallel motion to Galvek in that column that's safe from the tidal wave. This can get a little confusing, so if you're lucky, hopefully you won't actually get this combination of attack, but be aware that you might need to make sure that you move in line with the wave. Once Galvek is down to 300 HP, it'll enter the final phase of the fight, and this is kind of the phase where Galvek unlocks all of his abilities except for the tidal wave. He also gains a new ability, which is the Rock Smash attack, where he basically sends a boulder your way. If it hits you, it'll lock you in place for a long time. This itself is actually not that dangerous, but if he does it and then issues a firebomb your way, it's basically instant death, so you really need to make sure you avoid those rock attacks when you see them come out. Other than that, it's basically the same attacks, but he does regain his teleport ability. However, this one does not teleport you into melee distance anymore necessarily, so when it triggers, just know you may get disoriented as you get transferred across the battlefield. And there we go. So another very strict DPS check, so definitely don't be afraid to upgrade gear, just like with the Vorkath fight if you're struggling. Otherwise, you should be able to power through with enough tries. I hope this guide has helped. I hope you're able to complete Dragon Slayer 2 and continue on with your journeys through the game. If it did help, definitely leave a like on the video, consider subscribing to the channel, and thank you for watching. And before we go, of course, I must give a huge shout out to the members who have joined the channel, especially the members at that top tier. OneKiller912, Peepo Time, and Tuan Pendrag. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.